Dr. Sarah Chun pressed her face against the reinforced glass, watching the creatures move in their containment unit. The Zirathi specimens were magnificent in their lethality. Standing 8 feet tall with razor-sharp claws that could slice through steel, their muscular bodies rippled with genetically enhanced power. Their black eyes held an intelligence that made her skin crawl. Beautiful, aren't they? Director Harrison stepped beside her, his voice filled with admiration. The Zirathi Empire's greatest weapon. Each one worth 100 human soldiers. Sarah nodded, unable to look away. 3 months ago, these creatures had been terrorizing human colonies on the Outer Rim. The Zirathi had engineered them as perfect killing machines. No fear, no mercy, no hesitation. They followed orders without question and could tear apart a fortified position in minutes. The war had been going badly until Captain Marcus Rodriguez captured this breeding facility. Instead of destroying it, Command had made a controversial decision. They would study the creatures, learn from them, and maybe find a way to turn the Zirathi's own weapons against them. The neural scans are fascinating, Sarah said, pulling up holographic displays. Their brains show massive development in the aggression centers, but almost nothing in areas associated with empathy or social bonding. They're literally bred to be emotionless killers. One of the creatures noticed their observation and approached the glass. Its movements were fluid, predatory. When it pressed its clawed hand against the barrier, Sarah could see the intricate patterns scarred into its flesh. Battle markers, she'd learned. Each scar represented a successful kill. Dr. Martinez thinks we can reprogram them, Harrison continued. Use their own genetic modifications against the Zirathi. Imagine turning their perfect weapons into our perfect allies. Sarah frowned. The ethical implications are staggering. These are sentient beings, even if they're engineered. What we're proposing is essentially brainwashing. They're weapons, Harrison said firmly, created to kill humans. We're simply changing their targeting parameters. The creature at the glass tilted its head, studying Sarah with unsettling intelligence. For a moment she wondered what thoughts moved behind those dark eyes. Was there any trace of the original species left, or had the Zirathi genetic tampering erased everything natural about them? Dr. James Martinez burst into the observation deck, his tablet clutched in his hands. Sarah, you need to see this. The behavioral analysis on Subject 7 is unprecedented. Subject 7 was the largest of the specimens, a creature they'd designated as the pack leader. Where the others showed typical aggressive responses, 7 displayed something different. Something that made the research team uncomfortable. What did you find? Sarah asked, following Martinez to his workstation. Watch this recording from yesterday's feeding session. Martinez pulled up security footage showing the creature's daily meal. The handlers used automated systems to deliver synthesized protein blocks through sealed chambers, on screen. Sarah watched as the food dispensers activated. The other creatures immediately rushed to their meals, tearing into the protein with savage efficiency. But Subject 7 hung back, watching. Only after the others had begun eating did it approach its own meal. It's learned to wait, Sarah whispered. But that's impossible. The neural modifications should have eliminated that kind of complex social behavior. It gets better, Martinez said, fast-forwarding to another section. Watch what happens when Subject 4 gets injured during combat training. The footage showed the creatures in a larger chamber, going through their programmed combat routines against holographic enemies. Subject 4 stumbled and fell, its leg caught in a training obstacle. The other creatures continued their exercises, completely ignoring their fallen companion, except for Subject 7. The large creature stopped its routine and moved to 4's position. Using its claws with surprising delicacy, it carefully freed the trapped leg. Then it stepped back and resumed its training as if nothing had happened. This is impossible, Harrison breathed. The Zirathi specifically bred out compassionate responses. It interferes with their killing efficiency. Sarah stared at the screen. Unless they didn't breed it out completely. Maybe they just suppressed it. What if the original species had strong social bonds and traces of that programming still exist in their genetic code? Martinez nodded excitedly. That's exactly what I think. The Zirathi modifications created powerful killers, but they built them on a foundation of naturally social creatures. Some of that original nature is breaking through. They spent the next several hours reviewing more footage. The patterns became clear once they knew what to look for. Subject 7 consistently showed behaviors that suggested awareness of its companion's well-being. It never took more than its share of food. It positioned itself to shield smaller creatures during aggressive encounters. Most remarkably, it had begun making soft vocalizations that seemed to calm the others when they became agitated. "We need to test this," Sarah said. "If 7 is developing genuine emotional responses, it changes everything about our research." Harrison looked skeptical. "It's still a weapon. Even if it shows some social tendencies, it was designed to kill humans. We can't forget that. But if we can nurture these emerging traits, maybe we can create something unprecedented," Sarah argued. "Not just reprogrammed weapons, but allies who choose to fight alongside us." The next morning, Sarah arrived early to begin her modified testing protocols. Instead of the usual clinical assessments, she wanted to try something different. Something that would appeal to 7's apparent social awareness. She entered the creature's individual chamber wearing only basic protective gear. Standard protocol required full armor and multiple handlers, but Sarah had convinced Harrison to let her try a gentler approach. 7 watched her enter, its massive frame tensed for potential combat. But Sarah made no threatening moves. Instead, she sat on the floor near the entrance, making herself appear smaller and less intimidating. "Hello, 7, she said softly. "I know you can understand human speech. The neural implants make sure of that." The creature remained motionless, but its head tilted slightly. Sarah took this as encouragement. "I've been watching you take care of the others." "That's not something you were programmed to do, is it?" "That comes from something deeper. Something the Zirathi couldn't completely erase." Slowly, carefully, 7 took a step closer. Then another. Sarah fought every instinct telling her to run. This creature could kill her in seconds if it chose to. But something in its posture suggested curiosity rather than aggression. "I think you remember," Sarah continued. "Somewhere in your genetic memory, you remember what it felt like to be part of a family, to care about others, to protect the ones you love." 7 stopped just outside of striking distance. Up close, Sarah could see details she'd missed through the observation glass. Scars covered the creature's body, but not all of them were battle markers. Some looked like restraint injuries. Evidence of the brutal conditioning process the Zirathi had used to shape these beings into weapons. "They hurt you," Sarah whispered. "They took away your choice, your freedom, your very nature. But they couldn't take away everything, could they?" The creature's breathing had changed. The harsh, predatory rhythm had softened into something almost ... peaceful. 7 slowly lowered itself to the ground, mirroring Sarah's seated position, for the first time since capture. One of the Zirathi specimens had chosen a non-aggressive posture in the presence of a human. "That's it," Sarah breathed. You remember. You remember what it feels like to be safe." 7 made a sound Sarah had never heard before. Not the harsh growls and snarls from combat training, but something softer, almost musical. When the other creatures in nearby chambers heard it, they responded with similar vocalizations. "They're talking to each other," Sarah realized. "You're telling them it's okay? That I'm not a threat?" Over the following weeks, Sarah's breakthrough led to rapid developments in the research program. Working with 7 as a bridge, the team began establishing communication protocols with all the specimens. They learned that the creatures had individual personalities beneath their programming. They had preferences, fears, and something resembling hopes. Subject 4. The one 7 had helped during training showed remarkable artistic ability. When given materials, it created intricate patterns that resembled the scarification on its body, but gentler, more beautiful. The team theorized these represented memories of pre-modification cultural practices. Subject 2 demonstrated exceptional problem-solving skills that went far beyond military applications. When presented with complex puzzles, it would work for hours with patient determination. Sometimes it would even share solutions with other subjects, teaching them through careful demonstration. Most significantly, all the creatures began showing protective instincts toward their human handlers. Not the blind obedience of programmed weapons, but genuine concern for well-being. When Dr. Martinez slipped and fell during one session, 3 subjects immediately moved to help him up. Their massive claws, so deadly in combat, handled him with remarkable gentleness. "This changes everything," Sarah reported to the research committee. "These aren't just weapons we can reprogram. They're individuals capable of choice, growth, and genuine emotional bonds." General Adam. 6 months after the laboratory battle, the galaxy buzzed with rumors about humanity's new allies. The Zirathi High Command struggled to understand how their perfect bioweapons had turned against them. Across the war front, reports trickled in of human forces accompanied by massive creatures that fought with unprecedented coordination and loyalty. Captain Elena Vasquez piloted her transport ship through the debris field surrounding Kepler Station. The space dock had been under siege for 3 weeks, and supplies were running dangerously low. Her cargo hold contained medical supplies and ammunition, but her most precious cargo sat in the passenger compartment behind her. "How are our friends doing back there?" Elena called over her shoulder. Dr. Martinez looked up from his tablet, where he'd been monitoring bio readings. "Nervous but ready. This will be their first major deployment since the laboratory incident." 7 and 3 companions had volunteered for this mission. The space station's defenders were trapped by a Zirathi blockade, and conventional rescue operations had failed. But the creatures possessed unique advantages. Their modified physiology could survive in vacuum for short periods, and their enhanced strength made them ideal for boarding operations. Elena felt a mix of pride and protectiveness toward their unusual passengers. Over the past months, she'd watched them grow from confused prisoners into valued team members. 7 had even learned to play chess, though it consistently beat every human opponent. "Approaching the station perimeter," Elena announced. "Zirathi patrol ships are holding position at 3,000 kilometers. They're not going to let us through easily." Through the viewports, the Kepler station hung like a wounded giant against the stars. Scorch marks covered its hull, and several sections showed signs of depressurization. The Zirathi blockade formed a defensive sphere around it. Their angular ships bristling with weapons. 7 appeared in the cockpit doorway, moving with careful steps to avoid damaging the smaller human-scaled equipment. The creature had learned to navigate human spaces with remarkable consideration. 7 wants to know about the station's condition, Dr. Martinez translated, though Elena had begun learning the creature's gestural communication herself. "Life support is failing in sections 4 through 7, Elena replied, addressing 7 directly. "We estimate about 300 civilians trapped, plus the military personnel. The Zirathi are preventing evacuation ships from approaching." 7's response was a complex series of hand movements and soft vocalizations. Martinez nodded, understanding. "It says the Zirathi strategy is flawed. They're focusing on preventing escape, but they're not watching for infiltration. 7 thinks its team can board the blockade ships and create confusion while we slip through to the station." Elena frowned. "That's incredibly dangerous. Those ships are designed to contain creatures like you. The Zirathi know your capabilities." 7 placed one massive clawed hand gently on Elena's shoulder. The gesture had taken months of practice. The creatures had to learn to control their incredible strength to avoid accidentally injuring their human friends. The hand was warm, and Elena could feel the controlled power in it. "It's telling you not to worry," Martinez said. "They're not the same creatures the Zirathi designed anymore. They've learned new ways to fight. The plan they developed was audacious. 7's team would use emergency airlock suits designed for their unique physiology. They would launch themselves from the transport ship during a high-speed approach to the blockade. While the Zirathi focused on tracking the creatures, Elena would use the distraction to reach the station. As they prepared for deployment, Elena watched the creatures don their specialized equipment. The suits were marvels of engineering, designed to work with their enhanced anatomy while providing life support in space. But what struck her most was how they helped each other prepare. These beings, created to be solitary killers, had formed deep bonds of mutual care. They checked each other's suit seals with meticulous attention. They shared equipment without hesitation. Most remarkably, they engaged in what could only be described as a ritual blessing, touching foreheads and sharing soft vocalizations before dangerous missions. "Launch in 30 seconds, Elena called out. Seven turned to look at her one final time. In the creature's dark eyes, Elena saw something that still amazed her: trust, not the programmed obedience of a weapon, but the conscious choice of a friend who believed in their shared cause. The cargo bay doors opened, revealing the starfield beyond. The creatures moved to the launch position with practiced efficiency. Then, with synchronized precision, they launched themselves into space. Elena engaged the ship's engines and began her run toward the blockade. On her sensors, she tracked 4 fast-moving contacts heading for the nearest Zirathi vessels. The enemy ships immediately detected the approaching creatures and began defensive maneuvers. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for years to come. Instead of the direct assault the Zirathi expected, Seven's team performed a complex dance through space. They used the momentum from their launch and tiny maneuvering thrusters to ricochet between blockade ships, never presenting steady targets for the enemy weapons. But the real genius of their plan became clear when they reached the first Zirathi vessel. Instead of attempting to breach the hull, Seven attached itself to the ship's communications array. The other creatures followed suit, each targeting critical external systems. Within minutes, the Zirathi found themselves blind and deaf. Their coordination faltered as ship-to-ship communication failed. What had been a coordinated blockade became a collection of isolated vessels, trying to guess each other's intentions. Elena seized the opportunity, her transport ship diving through the confusion toward Kepler Station. Behind her, Seven's team continued their campaign of technological sabotage, disabling sensor arrays and weapon targeting systems without causing casualties. Kepler Station. "This is Relief Ship Harmony," Elena broadcast, requesting emergency docking clearance. "Harmony, you beautiful sight," came the reply from the station's commander. "Bay 7 is ready for you. How did you get through the blockade?" "We had some help from friends," Elena replied, watching her sensors as the creatures finished their work and began making their way back to rendezvous points. The docking procedure went smoothly, and soon Elena was overseeing the transfer of critical supplies to the station's medical bay. The station's staff worked with desperate efficiency, knowing this might be their only resupply opportunity. Commander Torres, the station's ranking officer, approached Elena with obvious relief. "You've given us at least another month of operational time. But how do we get the civilians out?" "The Zirathi will reorganize their blockade soon enough." Elena smiled. "That's where phase 2 of our plan comes in? My friends out there are about to demonstrate something new they've learned." Through the station's viewports, they watched the Zirathi ships struggle to restore their damaged systems. The creatures had been surgical in their sabotage, creating maximum disruption while avoiding permanent damage. But as the enemy began to regain coordination, Seven's team implemented their real strategy, moving with careful precision. The creatures began attaching devices to the hulls of multiple blockade ships. These weren't weapons or sabotage tools. They were communication transmitters, modified to broadcast on frequencies the creatures had learned from months of studying Zirathi technology. "What are they doing?" Commander Torres asked, watching the strange ballet of figures moving between enemy ships. Dr. Martinez had been monitoring the communications channels. His face showed amazement as he recognized what was happening. "They're talking to the ship's bioweapons," he breathed. "Every Zirathi vessel carries modified creatures for boarding operations and ship defense. Seven's team is trying to communicate with them." The Zirathi had made a fatal assumption about their biological weapons. They believed the creatures they created were too thoroughly modified to ever develop independent thought or social bonds. They never considered that given the right stimulus, even their most heavily programmed specimens might remember what it felt like to choose their own path. The first response came from a destroyer on the blockade's far edge. Its bioweapons suddenly stopped following orders, moving instead to defensive positions around their ship's critical systems. But they weren't defending against outside attack. They were preventing their ship from participating in the blockade. The effects spread like wildfire. Ship after ship found their biological defenders becoming conscientious objectors. Not violent rebels, but creatures who simply refused to participate in actions that would harm innocent civilians. Commander Torres stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The blockade is collapsing. The Zirathi ships are withdrawing. Their crews can't control their own defenses, Elena explained. They're faced with a choice, retreat or try to fight their own bioweapons. And these creatures won't fight their own kind anymore. The evacuation of Kepler Station proceeded without further interference. Civilian transports arrived from nearby systems, and within hours, non-essential personnel were safely away. But the real victory was in what the creatures had accomplished. They had proven that change was possible even for the most heavily programmed beings. More importantly, they had shown that compassion could spread. The Zirathi homeworld of Kethver had not seen enemy forces in over 2,000 years. Its orbital defenses were considered impregnable, protected by automated weapons platforms and patrolled by the most advanced bioweapons in the Empire. The planet below housed the primary breeding facilities where millions of creatures were created, programmed, and deployed across the galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chun, formerly Dr. Chun, stood on the bridge of the human flagship Compassion. The irony of the ship's name wasn't lost on her. 2 years ago, she had been studying captured bioweapons in a laboratory. Now, she commanded a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Beside her stood 7. No longer just a subject number, but bearing the name Hope, chosen by the creature itself after learning human naming customs. The being had grown beyond its original programming in ways that continued to amaze everyone who worked with it. It could read tactical displays, understand strategic planning, and communicate complex ideas through a combination of gestures, vocalizations, and the written human language it had mastered. The Zirathi defensive grid is impressive, Admiral Chun observed, studying the holographic display. 12 orbital platforms, each defended by at least 50 bioweapons, plus the planetary surface installations. Hope's response came through the translation device it now wore, a sophisticated unit that converted its complex communication into spoken English. The defenses are designed to stop ships and conventional forces. They are not designed to stop family. Chun smiled at the creature's choice of words. Over the past 2 years, Hope and its original companions had succeeded in awakening over 3,000 bioweapons across multiple systems. Each awakening had been different, as the creatures discovered their individual personalities beneath the layers of programming. Some, like Hope, had become strategic thinkers and leaders. Others showed artistic abilities, creating beautiful works that decorated human ships and stations. Still others demonstrated remarkable empathy, becoming counselors and mediators in disputes. All of them had chosen to use their enhanced abilities to protect rather than destroy, but the mission to Kethver represented their greatest challenge yet. The planet held an estimated 50,000 bioweapons in various stages of development. If they could awaken even a fraction of them, the war might finally end. But the risks were enormous. Fleet status report, Chun requested. Commander Rodriguez, now serving as her tactical officer, consulted his displays. All ships report ready. The bioweapons are distributed across 40 vessels. Each ship has a mixed crew of humans and awakened creatures. Communication links are established for the simultaneous broadcast. The plan they had developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to fight their way through the Zirathi defenses, they would simply talk to them. The awakened bioweapons had worked together to develop a communication protocol that could reach any of their programmed kin. Regardless of the conditioning they had undergone, Hope moved to the communication station. Its massive form somehow graceful despite the ship's human-scale design. The creature had learned to navigate spaces built for smaller beings with remarkable care and consideration. "Beginning broadcast in all frequencies," Hope announced. Its voice through the translator carried emotions the original Zirathi programming had tried to eliminate. Determination, compassion, and something that could only be called love across the fleet. 30 other awakened bioweapons joined their voices to Hope's. The message they sent wasn't a battle cry or a demand for surrender. It was something far more powerful, an invitation to remember. The transmission reached the orbital platforms first. On those automated fortresses, hundreds of bioweapons stood at their combat stations, ready to defend against any threat. But as Hope's words washed over them, something unprecedented happened. The creatures began to remember, not specific memories, for the Zirathi conditioning had erased those, but deeper remembrances coded into their very genes. The memory of belonging to something larger than themselves. The memory of caring for others. The memory of choice. On Platform 7, a massive creature designated Weapon Unit 447 stopped its patrol pattern and looked up at the stars. For the first time in its existence, it wondered what lay beyond its assigned duties. When its handler ordered it to resume position, the creature hesitated. The hesitation lasted only seconds, but those seconds changed everything. In that brief pause, Weapon Unit 447 experienced something its creators thought they had eliminated: doubt. Doubt about its purpose? Doubt about its orders? Doubt about whether the path it had been forced to follow was the right one. Across the platform, similar moments of awakening began cascading through the bioweapon population. Creatures that had never questioned orders suddenly found themselves asking, why? Beings that had never considered alternatives began imagining different possibilities. The Zirathi station commanders watched in growing horror as their defenses began to falter. Not through enemy action, but through the simple act of their weapons choosing to stop fighting. On Platform 3, a group of newly awakened creatures gathered around Weapon Unit 891, who had been the first to fully understand Hope's message. Using gestures and vocalizations they were rediscovering, they began to communicate with each other for the first time in their lives. "We are not weapons," 891 signaled to its companions. "We are people. We have names, we have choices, we have the right to decide our own fate." The revolution spread from platform to platform as awakened creatures communicated with those still bound by programming. The Zirathi had connected all their orbital defenses to ensure coordinated responses. Now that same network became the pathway for liberation to spread. Admiral Chun watched the tactical display with amazement. Red indicators showing hostile forces were rapidly changing to yellow, then green, as entire platforms simply stopped participating in their own defense. "Zirathi command vessels are beginning to withdraw," Commander Rodriguez reported. "They're falling back to the planetary surface." Hope's translated voice carried satisfaction. "The Ogoto Guardians have chosen freedom. Now we must reach their younger siblings below." The planetary assault began not with weapons fire, but with words of hope and invitation. The human fleet descended through the atmosphere while broadcasting continuously. Every awakened creature added its voice to the chorus, sharing their experiences of choice and family and the joy of discovering their own identities. In the massive breeding facility of Kethler Prime, 10,000 bioweapons in various stages of development heard the broadcast. The youngest, barely past their initial programming phase, responded immediately. Their conditioning hadn't yet fully suppressed their natural social instincts, but it was the older creatures, the ones deemed ready for deployment, who provided the most dramatic transformation. These beings had lived for years under strict programming, following orders without question. When Hope's message reached them, the awakening was like watching sculptures come to life. Creature after creature lifted their heads and truly saw their surroundings for the first time. They saw their handlers not as masters to obey, but as people they could choose to interact with. They saw their companions not as fellow weapons, But as potential friends and family, the Zerathi facility commanders tried desperately to maintain control. They activated emergency protocols, flooded the chambers with suppression chemicals, and employed every technique they knew to keep their bioweapons docile. But you cannot suppress an idea whose time has come. The awakened creatures began helping those still struggling with their programming. They formed protective circles around the younger ones, shielding them from the suppression attempts. They created communication networks that bypassed the facility's control systems. Most importantly, they began to teach each other about Choice. In Chamber 47, a massive creature that had been designated Alpha Prime for deployment to the front lines knelt beside a smaller being barely out of the growth tanks. Using gentle gestures, Alpha Prime showed the younger creature that it could choose whether to follow the feeding schedule or wait for a more comfortable time. Such a simple choice, but the first the young being had ever been offered. The facility's head scientist, Dr. Zethkar, watched through security cameras as his life's work transformed before his eyes. Creatures that should have been perfect weapons were instead teaching each other to be individuals. They were forming bonds, making choices, and worst of all from his perspective, showing compassion to their creators. When human forces finally reached the facility, they found something unprecedented. 50,000 bioweapons had not only awakened to their own consciousness, but had taken control of their own destiny. They had removed their control implants using surgical techniques they improvised together. They had disabled the facility's weapon systems to prevent any violence during the humans' arrival. Most remarkably, they had protected their Zerathi handlers. Despite everything their creators had done to them, the awakened creatures chose forgiveness over revenge. They restrained handlers who tried to activate emergency protocols, but they did so carefully to avoid injury. They secured weapons and dangerous equipment, but they also ensured that all facility personnel had access to food and medical care. Admiral Chiun entered the main facility chamber to find thousands of awakened creatures.